Christy. Welcome back to my channel and welcome to day 16 of my 2021 holiday card series. Today I'm going to be using the MFT Selfies with Santa stamp set. So I've stamped my images out in Lawn Fawn jet black ink on some Spectrum Noir ultra smooth premium white cardstock, and I'll be coloring with my Copic markers. So the first thing that I want to tackle is the background. I feel like it's a lot easier to color that in now than to do it later when the other images are filled in and potentially drag some of the other coloring into the background. So I'm going to start with BG quadruple 0, BG 10, and BG 11. And I'm going to take the square and kind of divide it into thirds. So the bottom third I'm going to fill in with that BG 11, and then I'll come up about another third with the BG 10, and then I'll use the BG quadruple 0 to do the top third. So these colors blend really nicely together, so you get a nice smooth background. But to make sure that that is even smoother, I am using the side of the nib as I color, not the tip. That way I get a wider swath of color and you'll have less streakiness. So I'm just going to do each of these the same, just filling in those backgrounds. Like I said, I just thought it would be a lot easier to get that out of the way now. And I wanted to use a softer, paler color because I really want these adorable little critters and Santa and the snowman to stand out from the background. So I thought something really soft would be pretty, and aqua is my favorite color, so it was just kind of a natural thing to reach for me. So this could be a sky, it could also be a room. My craft room is painted in this pale aqua, so I don't really want to draw your attention to the background. I just want to have a nice backdrop for these really sweet little critters. So I'm moving on now to the polar bears, and I didn't want to do them in grays. I wanted something a little bit different. So I went with E40, E41, and E42. So I'm laying in that E42 first for my shadow, but I'm going to be real sparing with that one because it is a little bit darker and I want to keep these looking like polar bears, not like brown bears. So I'm going to soften that with the E41 and then come in with the E40, but I'm still leaving quite a bit of white space so you get that really nice white reflection. And then I'm going to move on to the one in the middle. I'm not 100% sure if this guy is a polar bear because you can't see his ears, but I do believe it is because he has the same claws as the bears in both of the other pictures. So I think his hat is just pulled down over his ears. So that's what I'm going with. So I'm going to color him exactly the same, just kind of flipping where I place the shadows. I want to have my shadows on the backs of their bodies and the highlight on their faces. In this case, the light source is coming from the camera since they're taking selfies. So it would be flashing right on their face, and that would be where the highlight would be the most. So just putting the shadows down their backs and on the underside of their arms, and a little bit like at the bottom of this shot as well, just to create a little bit of depth there, and then blending out with the other two shades and always saving that bit of white space. I'm going to move on to my reindeer, and for those I'm using E33, E35, and E37. I'm going to start with the E37 and add some shadows to the top part of their face. I'm going to leave the part below the nose to be a different color, so just concentrating on that. And then also there is like a patch on the belly. There's a little line on the outer edge, so I'm just going to work carefully around that and put a little shadow on the underside of the arm. and then I'll start to blend that out with the E35. I want to try to keep the eyes light if I can. They are really close to the line there, so I'm being really careful not to go over those too much with that E35. I would rather have them colored in with the E33 so that you can still see them clearly. So I will come in with that shade next, and I'm going to fill in the rest of that space. It is a very large amount of space for a highlight, so I will go back over this image with a second layer over both of the reindeer actually, to just make that blend a little bit smoother. You can kind of see a line there where the E35 and the E33 met, and I do want to eliminate that. So I'm going to go back in, starting with that E37 again. I wanted to put a little shadow up above the nose on the bridge there, just to create more depth and make the nose look a little bit more pushed out. So then I'll come back with that E35 and blend over the transition between the darkest and that mid-tone. And then I'll come back with the E33 and fill everything in once again. Also add a little bit to the ears and the arm and the side there. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to move on to the other reindeer. And I'm going to color him with the same shade. So I'm starting again with that E37 and doing those shadows and just following the artist drawn lines there for the little belly area and all of that, because I want to keep that light. I'm going to add a shadow down the sides of the body and a little bit of a heavier one where the scarf comes down, because that would be casting a shadow. And then I'll come in with the mid-tone, that E35, and start to blend everything out. Just going over that E37 like a few times with each pass of that marker so that it breaks up that harsh line. So it should get a little bit of a nicer blend. And then scribbling over the edge of the E35 with that E33 and bringing it toward the center so I have a nice highlight. On this one, his eyes did get a little bit dark, but hopefully you can still see them. If you're nervous about it, you could always go over them with a black pen at the end, but the lines are so delicate that I was afraid that I would go off of the lines and then it wouldn't look quite right, so I decided to just leave it. And then I wanted to tie that brown in one more time in the third selfie, so I use that for the little twig arms of my snowman. For the lighter parts of my reindeer, I'm going to use E30 and E31. So I'll do some color on the insides of the ears and then also on the lower part of the face and the belly, putting a shadow under that scarf and also under the polar bear's paw where that would be casting a shadow, and then blending out with the E30. And I'm still going to leave some white space on that as well. I did take my colorless blender and try to kind of smooth out the edge of the E30. And then I'm going to let that dry and see how I like it, and I'll come back to it in a minute. But in the meantime, I'm going to move on to reindeer number 2. I just love these guys. I think their expressions are so joyful with their little smiles and their squinty eyes. I just think they look super, super cute. So I'm going to color him just the same, just adding those shadows wherever there's something that would be casting one. And then I went over the edge of the E30 with the colorless blender, but I felt like that wasn't enough of a transition, so I decided to add in a super pale E, and that is the E000. So I'm just going to flick a little bit from the E30 into the white space and still leave just a sliver of that white space showing. And then I'm going to move on to the reindeer's antlers and hooves. And for that, I'm going to use E44, E47, and E49. That E49 is a super dark shade. It's almost black. So I'm going to add just a touch of that to the little hooves and a little bit to the antlers too, just kind of adding a very thin little line with the very tip of that marker so that it isn't too dark there. And then I'll blend up with the E47 and just bring that color a little bit more toward the center of those antlers as well. And then I'll do the second guy. Since these areas are super small, I went ahead and did them both at once. And then once I have that done, I'll grab that E44 and just fill in the rest of that space. And I think it looks nice to have the darker brown instead of the black for the hooves. I think either would be fine, but I just thought that having the colors kind of match the antlers just made sense to me. So then I'm going to work on the penguins, and I'm using T1, T3, and T5. So I'm going to start with the T5 and lay in some shadow on either side of the face, although I'm doing a little bit more on the right hand side since he's a little bit facing the left. I also put a little bit above the beak to cast a little shadow there, and then on the underside of the flipper and down the back. I blended that out with the T3 and then used the T1 for the highlight. And then I'll come over and do the second penguin that is cuddling up to Santa. So he is pretty much facing the same direction as the tiny little guy that's sitting on top of the polar bear's hat. So I'm going to do his shading pretty much the same. And there was a tiny little sliver of sky that I had missed in the bottom corner. I went ahead and just colored that in with the T5 because I know that the frame that I'm putting this in is going to cut out a little bit of the edges because it's smaller. So that's never going to show anyway, so I just went ahead and filled it in with that T5. And then for the lighter parts of the body, I'm going to use T0 and T1. Just do a little quick shading with that T1. I'm going to blend that out with the T0. And I'm going to leave some white cardstock showing for the highlight once again. And then while I was working with those T's, I decided to do Santa's gloves because I wanted those to be black. So I used T5, T7, and T9. I did a little shadow on the bottom side and then also between the thumb and the rest of the mitten with that T9. And then I'm blending that out with the T7 and I'll fill in the rest with the T5. I wanted them to be quite a bit darker than the penguins so it would really stand out over top of him. Then for their little beaks, I'm using YR04 and YR07. Just a touch of that YR07 first, blending out with the YR04. And then I'll also do the snowman's carrot nose with those shades. And for the rest of the snowman, I wanted to do something that was not the same as the background, but still light and looking like snow. So I went with G00 and G00. Then I wanted to do Santa's skin, so I just went with my go-to skin combo for Caucasians, and I went with E00, E00, and E11. It's not a whole lot showing there, so it was real quick and easy to do. And now that I have everybody's face colored in, I'm going to add some rosy cheeks and also put a little color on the inside of the reindeer's ears and the polar bear on the far right. His ear is showing the inner part as well. So I used R11 and R20 for those, and I felt like it needed a third shade there, so I grabbed the R000 as well, filled in the ears with that, and went around the cheek area with that as well, just to help everything blend in and look a little bit softer, since the areas that the cheeks are on for all of these critters is pretty light. So I didn't want it to be too strong, just a nice sweet little blush there. So I kind of just worked one panel at a time, or one selfie at a time, and filled all of those in. So I just laid the R20 in a little oval shape for the cheeks, and then traced around the edge of that with the R11, and then did it again with the R000. For Santa's beard, I wanted to do a different gray than the penguin, so I went with W00, W1, and W3. So I started with the W3 and did a little shading on the little swoosh part of hair that's kind of peeking out from under his hat, and also on his eyebrows, the bottom of his mustache, and I'm going to add a few little flicks into his beard as well. And I blended out with the W1 and then the W00. So all of the striped accessories are going to be red, white, and green. And I wanted to color in the white parts just real quick and easy. So I'm just going over the entire thing with the E70. I wanted something, again, that was different than Santa's beard and then the penguins, so I went with the E70. I think it's a really pretty color. It's kind of like a grayish. It's a mix between like a tan and a gray, but I think it works well for shading white areas. So I'm just going over all of those little things that are striped and adding a little line of coloring. And then I'm also adding a little bit of fluffy texture to all of the little pom-poms on the ends of the hats, and also to Santa's sleeves to make those look nice and woolly, and doing the brim of Santa's hat as well, just doing a little dot texture so it looks nice and fluffy. Then I'm ready for my red combo, which is R24, R29, and R39. So I'm going to start with the top part of the polar bear's hat. I wanted that to be red. So I laid in a little shadow right above the hat brim. Since it's really thick, it looks like it's been rolled over. So that would be casting a shadow there on the top. And I'm going to do the same for the polar bear in the second selfie. I'm just going to do both of them at the same time since it's a pretty small area. I'm blending out with the R29 and then filling in with the R24 for the highlight. I am going to have quite a bit of red on this card because there's so much detail and so many things to color. I just felt like keeping that color palette really simple and in very traditional Christmas colors was going to just help streamline the process a little bit. So I'm going to move over and do Santa's hat and his little outfit as well. So I'm just carefully coloring in his sleeves and his little chest. So I want to go right around that little the penguin and the polar bear, and also his beard. So I need to be really, really careful and use the very tip of my marker, especially for that tiny sliver that is showing between the polar bear's face and his arm. There's like a tiny little line there. So using the very tip of that marker so that I get a really thin line, because I do not want any of that red to bleed. Although if you're using a really good cardstock like this Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White that is made for coloring with Copics, you should have much less bleeding. I normally don't have trouble with bleeding unless I've been laying down way too much color, which normally I don't do that unless I have a leaky marker or something like that. But it makes a huge, huge difference if you're using the right cardstock that is intended for coloring with alcohol markers, because that alcohol in the marker needs a place to go in that cardstock. It absorbs into the fibers of that paper, and if the fibers of the paper aren't thick enough to take that ink, it has nowhere to go except outside of your lines. So make sure if you're having any issues with bleeding, especially with reds, because it's so hard to clean up a red once it goes out of the lines, that you're really investing in a good quality cardstock, because it's going to make all the difference in your coloring, I promise you. So how I'm going to do these stripes is I'm going to do red, white, green, white. So I'm just kind of counting out the stripes and doing a red one and then skipping 3 and then doing another red one. That way I don't have to keep switching marker combos. So I'm just doing all of the red stripes at once. And like I said, I'm going to keep it consistent across the board. Everybody's going to get matching outfits. Maybe Mrs. Claus was working away since last Christmas on little gifts for all of the little critters in the North Pole, and she made matching ones for everybody. I mean, could happen. So I'm just going to give everybody the same little matching scarves and hats. I'm also going to color the candy cane while I have these markers out, but of course just doing every other stripe because that's just going to be red and white. And since these areas are all really small that I'm working on, I'm just using one shade at a time per selfie. So I'm doing all the R39 before I move on to the R29 and then the R24, and then once I get to the next little selfie, I'll start all over again. I'm so glad that I'm getting a chance to play with these images today. This is one of the sets that I got pretty early on and have been saving it for the right time in this holiday card series, and I just think that these images are so darling. I really, really love Stacy Yakula, the illustrator of these stamps. I just think that her designs are so whimsical, and I'm always in love with whatever she comes out with, but I thought this set was just especially cute. There are 3 other selfies that I didn't get to use today. So you could easily recreate this card design with a second card using the other 3 selfies. I didn't do that today just because I knew that with all of the detail in these 3, it was going to be a longer video, and if I would have doubled it up, it would have been like an hour long. And I know you guys don't have time to sit and watch that, so I just limited it to 1 card today with the 3 selfies, but you could easily do a second one. So I'm going to move on to my green combo, which is G40, G43, and G46. Using the G46 to add a little shading to the bottom of each of those stripes. And now that the red is kind of blocked in, it makes it super easy to do the rest because it's just, skip 1 and then the next one is green. So in between those little sections of white stripes is the green one. So I'm going to blend out with the G43, and depending how much space there is, on some of the places I just filled in with the G43. If like the fabric was crinkled up and you couldn't see the whole stripe, I just figured you wouldn't see much highlight there either. So I went ahead and just colored them in with the darker 2 combos in that case. But whenever you could see like the whole stripe and it was a place where there would definitely be more light, like right on the belly area, then I went ahead and added in that highlight as well. So you guys know I always have to make up a story in my head on my cards. So for this one, I was thinking, when would these guys all be celebrating and, having their Christmas fun and taking selfies with Santa? And I figured it's got to be on Christmas Day. Once everything is over, Santa has delivered all of his gifts, the elves have been working all year, and all of these little, Christmas friends have been invited to the after party on Christmas Day. So they're all wearing their little matching outfits, their little gifts from Mrs. Claus, and celebrating together and taking their selfies and just having a great time. So I also gave the little tiny penguin a green scarf just to have a little bit of contrast since he's sitting on top of the red hat. And then for this little polar bear in the 3rd photo, I'm going to do a green hat top on him as well, just because there's so much red with Santa's outfit, so I wanted there to be something that would pop against it and have that bit of contrast. And then I went back and forth on what to do about the snowman's hat, but eventually I decided to do that in the green as well, because I still think, in comparison to how much red there was in this scene, that the green, will give it that balance. So because my light source is that flash bulb that's going off in the center of their faces, I put my shading on the left-hand side, and I broke that hat into about 3 parts. So I just did 1/3 with the G46, 1/3 with the G43, and then 1/3 with the G40, and then finished off his scarf as well. And for the stripe, I just went back to my E70 and added a bit of shading to the white. And then I'll trim these panels down and set them aside. I wanted to use some pattern paper on my focal panel, so I'm choosing a sheet from the Crepe Paper Busy Sidewalks 6x8 pad, and I went with this cozy looking plaid. And then I'm going to die cut that with the inner die from the Sunny Studio Slimline Scalloped Frame. I'm also going to take the MFT Slimline Stitch Square Trio, and I'm going to tape those together and run it through my die cutting machine so I get this panel with the 3 windows in it. So I'm going to work on my sentiment, and I'm using some Lawn Fawn Noble Fur ink to stamp out "Holiday Hugs are the best kind." And I'm using my Twiddler's Nook pressure pal to make sure I get a nice impression, and stamping that out twice. And then I'm also going to do an insert for the inside of my card. So I used that same inner die from the Sunny Studio set. And this time I'm using the stamp set "No One Stacks Up to You," since the Polaroid frames didn't fit on this panel and this little image with the penguins did. This is also designed by Stacy Yakula, so it has the same feel to it. And then the sentiment is still from the Selfies with Santa stamp set. It says, "This really is the most wonderful time of the year." So I'll set that aside, and I also die cut another one of these panels out of white cardstock so that I could pop this up with some foam tape, and it would have a little bit more stability than just the thin pattern paper. So I'm adding some liquid glue to that white panel, and then I'll lay my plaid piece right over top, and then I'm going to just adjust that until everything is lined up perfectly. So I kept the die taped together so it would be in the exact same position when I die cut the white piece. So once I have that, I'm going to go on with the rest of the assembly. I'm going to take that insert and glue that to the inside of my card. The card base is made of MFT's Amarina Cherry cardstock, and it measures 8.5 by 7, and then it's scored in half at the 3.5 mark, so it ends up being 3.5 by 8.5. So I'm going to glue this other scalloped border on. This is again from the Slimline Scalloped Frame by Sunny Studio. So that is going to be the base layer underneath my pattern paper. So I will grab the frame, and I'm going to add some foam tape to the back of that. And then I'm going to peel off some of the release papers. I want to be able to grab the edges of each little selfie with that foam tape as I line things up. So I'm just going to hold it over until I get the frame that I want, and then pop that down, and that foam tape is going to pick up that image. And then I'm going to do that with the other two. So I'm going to work on the square on the right hand side now, just making sure that is just where I want it, and then popping it down. And then I'll move to the one on the left and do the same thing. I didn't have it quite right, so I just repositioned that and then pop that down until I was happy. And then I'm going to add some liquid glue to the back of each of those little Polaroids and adhere this to the front of the card base. I die cut the sentiment using the Lawn Fawn Everyday Sentiment banners. So I'll add some more glue to the back of that. And then I'm going to line that up beneath the center Polaroid, because that's the one where everybody is hugging Santa. And then finally I wanted to add a little bit of Stardust Stickles to give a little sparkle to this card. So I'm going to add some to the little pom-poms on the hat and the candy cane to the little pom-poms on the ends of the hats. And then I'm also going to add it to all of the stripy parts of the hat bands and scarves. So I'm just squirting out a little bit and then using the nozzle to push that around. I did also add it to like the fluffy part of Santa's hat and his little cuffs on his jacket, and it ended up being quite a bit of sparkle, but I think this card is pretty simple otherwise. I really wanted the coloring to shine, but that's why I'm also not like covering up anything with that stickles, just adding a little bit down one side of it so that you can still see the coloring clearly, but just has that little bit of Christmas sparkle to it. So I'll lift that up to the camera so you can see that detail a little more clearly and all of that sparkle and shine. And there's another peek at the inside as well. I hope you guys enjoyed this one. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button. It lets me know that I'm doing a good job. Also subscribe if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that my videos always show up in your feed. I'm posting them 3 times a week until Christmas, so you don't want to miss any. If you're interested in any of these products, I'll have them listed and linked down below. And if you'd like to keep watching, here is day 16 of the previous 2 years of holiday card series. You can click on either one to check them out. Thank you guys so much again for watching. I hope you have an absolutely amazing day. Bye-bye.